Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us what city you're watching from. And when you reach the end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Now, let's begin. The morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows of Madison Taylor's cramped studio apartment, casting long golden streaks across the cluttered desk where her laptop hummed with urgency. Empty coffee cups formed a small tower beside stacks of foreign language textbooks, Korean grammar guides, Japanese vocabulary flashcards, and a well-worn Spanish dictionary. Madison sat hunched over her keyboard, fingers flying across the keys as she refreshed her email inbox for what felt like the 100th time that hour. Nothing. Still nothing. She exhaled sharply, running a hand through her tangled brown hair. 3 months of unemployment had drained her savings down to double digits, and her landlord had started leaving passive-aggressive notes under her door about rent being due. The freelance translation gigs she'd been scraping together barely covered groceries, let alone the mountain of student loans that haunted her inbox like digital ghosts. Her phone buzzed, jolting her from the spiral of anxiety. A text from her best friend, Chloe. "Any luck yet?" Madison typed back quickly. "Define luck." "If you mean I haven't been evicted yet, then yes." Chloe's reply came instantly. "Check JobHub. I saw a posting for a translator position at some big company. Serious pay." Madison's heart kicked into gear. She pulled up the job site, scrolling frantically through listings until she found it. Translator needed. Immediate hire. Competitive salary. Fluency in English and 1 additional language required. Apply in person. Blackwood Enterprises. Her breath caught. Blackwood Enterprises. Even someone as detached from the corporate world as Madison knew that name. Damian Blackwood, the 32-year-old CEO who'd taken a struggling tech firm and transformed it into a global empire in less than a decade. The man was a legend, equal parts genius and ruthless. Magazines called him the Ice King of Silicon Valley. His face had graced the covers of Forbes, Time, and every business publication in existence. Cold gray eyes, sharp jawline, and an expression that suggested he could calculate your net worth and dismiss you in the same glance. Madison stared at the address listed. The interview was today, in 2 hours. Her stomach flipped. She didn't have time to overthink this. Jumping up, she tore through her closet, pulling out the only professional outfit she owned, a simple black blazer and pencil skirt she'd bought for her college graduation 3 years ago. It still fit. Barely. She twisted her hair into a neat bun, applied minimal makeup, and grabbed her worn leather portfolio. This was it. Her last real shot. 1 hour and 47 minutes later, Madison stood in the lobby of Blackwood Enterprises, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that stretched so high she had to crane her neck to see the top. The interior was all polished marble, minimalist furniture, and abstract art that probably cost more than her entire education. Employees moved through the space with quiet efficiency, their tailored suits and confident strides making Madison feel like an imposter in discount heels. She approached the reception desk, where a woman with perfect blonde hair and a smile sharp enough to cut glass looked up. "I'm here for the translator position," Madison said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. The receptionist's eyes flicked over her, a brief assessment that left Madison feeling distinctly inadequate. 32nd floor. Elevator on your right. Ask for Mr. Caldwell. Madison nodded, her pulse hammering as she crossed the lobby. The elevator ride felt endless, a slow ascent accompanied by soft classical music that did nothing to calm her nerves. When the doors finally opened, she stepped into a sleek corridor lined with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A man in his 50s, silver-haired and wearing an expression of permanent disapproval, waited near a conference room. "You're here for the translator role?" "Madison Taylor," she confirmed, extending her hand. He shook it briefly, his grip firm and businesslike. "Gregory Caldwell, head of human resources. Follow me." He led her into a pristine conference room with a long glass table and leather chairs. "Sit. We don't have much time." Mr. Blackwood needs someone immediately. Madison sat, clutching her portfolio. Mr. Caldwell didn't waste a second. He slid a thick stack of documents across the table. These need to be translated from Korean to English by end of business today. If you can handle that, the job is yours. Salary is $75,000 annually, plus benefits. Start immediately. Madison's eyes widened. $75,000. That was more than she'd made in the past 2 years combined. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled the documents closer, scanning the first page. It was dense, technical, filled with legal and corporate terminology. Difficult, but not impossible. She looked up, meeting Mr. Caldwell's expectant gaze. I can do this. Good. He stood abruptly, checking his watch. I need your signature on the employment contract before you begin. He produced a separate folder, flipping it open to reveal a multi-page document. Standard terms, confidentiality agreement, non-compete clause, the usual. Sign here, here, and here. He pointed to highlighted lines scattered throughout the pages. Madison hesitated, her instincts prickling. She'd been taught never to sign anything without reading it thoroughly. But Mr. Caldwell was already tapping his pen impatiently against the table, and the clock on the wall reminded her she had exactly 6 hours to complete a translation that would determine whether she ate next month. She picked up the pen. The first signature went down smoothly, the second as well, but as she flipped to the third page, her eyes caught on a phrase halfway down. Marital agreement. She froze. Wait. What? Mr. Caldwell frowned. Is there a problem? Madison pointed to the line. This says marital agreement. I thought this was an employment contract. He waved a hand dismissively. It's a standard clause. Blackwood Enterprises requires absolute loyalty from employees in sensitive positions. It's legal terminology. Nothing to worry about. Madison's gut twisted, but Mr. Caldwell was already moving toward the door. If you're not interested, I have 3 other candidates waiting downstairs. Panic flared. She needed this job. Desperately. And he'd said it was standard. She was probably just overthinking it, reading too much into legal jargon she didn't fully understand. Swallowing her doubt, Madison signed the third line. Excellent. Mr. Caldwell took the folder, barely glancing at it. Welcome to Blackwood Enterprises, Mrs. Blackwood. Madison blinked. Excuse me? But he was already gone, the door clicking shut behind him. Mrs. Blackwood. What the hell did that mean? She stared at the stack of documents in front of her, her mind racing. Before she could process anything, the door opened again. This time, a different figure entered. Tall, imposing, dressed in a charcoal suit that fit like it had been tailored by angels. Damian Blackwood himself. Madison's breath caught. In person, he was even more intimidating than his photos suggested. His gray eyes swept over her with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, taking in every detail in a single glance. She felt stripped bare under that gaze, every insecurity laid out like evidence. You're the new translator, he said. It wasn't a question. His voice was deep, controlled, carrying the weight of someone used to being obeyed without question. Yes, Madison managed, her voice barely steady. I'm Madison Taylor. His expression didn't change. No. You're Madison Blackwood now. Her heart stopped. What? He stepped closer, his presence filling the room. You signed the marriage contract 10 minutes ago. Congratulations. We're legally married. Madison shot to her feet, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. That's impossible. I signed an employment contract. Damian's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile, though it held no warmth. You signed what was put in front of you. If you'd read it, you'd have known. But you didn't. Her mind reeled, denial crashing against the cold reality in his eyes. This is insane. You can't just trick someone into marrying you. It's illegal. It's a binding legal contract, he corrected. My lawyers made sure of that, and before you start threatening to sue, Know that fighting this in court will take years and cost you more than you'll ever earn." Madison's hands clenched into fists. Why? Why would you do this? For the first time, something flickered in his gaze. Not warmth, but something harder. Necessity. I need a wife for business reasons. You needed a job. Mutually beneficial arrangement. Her laugh came out bitter and sharp. Mutually beneficial? You lied to me. He tilted his head slightly, studying her. I didn't lie. I simply didn't clarify. There's a difference. Madison wanted to scream, to throw something, to storm out, but she was trapped, and they both knew it. If she walked away now, she'd have nothing. No job, no money, no way to fight him. Damien straightened, his expression returning to that impenetrable mask. You'll move into my residence by tonight. A car will pick you up at 6. Until then, I suggest you start on those translations. You're still employed after all. He turned and walked toward the door, leaving Madison standing there, her world shattered into pieces she didn't know how to reassemble. She whispered to the empty room, her voice breaking. What the hell just happened? Madison sat frozen in the conference room for a full 10 minutes after Damien Blackwood left, her mind spinning in useless circles. Married. She was married. To a man she'd met 5 minutes ago. A man who'd orchestrated the entire thing like some kind of corporate chess move. Her hands shook as she pulled out her phone, fingers fumbling as she dialed Chloe. Her best friend answered on the second ring. So? How'd it go? Did you get the job? I got married, Madison blurted out. Silence. Then Chloe's voice came back. Cautious. Okay, that's not funny. I'm serious. I signed what I thought was an employment contract. But it was actually a marriage license. I'm legally married to Damien Blackwood. Another beat of silence. Then Chloe's shriek nearly burst her eardrum. You're what? Madison filled her in quickly, the words tumbling out in a frantic rush. When she finished, Chloe's response was immediate and fierce. Get a lawyer. Right now. Sue his ass into oblivion. Madison slumped in her chair. With what money, Chloe? I can barely afford ramen. And he said fighting this could take years. Chloe swore colorfully. So what are you going to do? Madison looked at the stack of documents still waiting on the table. The translation work. The job she'd technically still been hired to do. I don't know, she admitted. But I have 6 hours to translate these files, and if I don't, I lose even the pretense of employment. Then I'll really have nothing. Chloe's voice softened. Maddie, you can't just accept this. I'm not accepting it, Madison said, though even she wasn't sure she believed that. I'm surviving. There's a difference. After hanging up, Madison forced herself to focus on the documents. The Korean text was dense, filled with technical jargon about international trade agreements and corporate mergers. Under any other circumstances, it would have been fascinating. Now, it just felt like a prison sentence. She worked mechanically, translating line by line, her brain latching onto the familiarity of grammar and syntax because it was easier than processing the nightmare her life had become. Hours blurred together. At some point, an assistant brought her coffee and a sandwich, both of which she consumed without tasting. By 5:30, she'd finished the translation, her eyes burning and her neck stiff from hunching over the laptop. She saved the document, emailed it to Mr. Caldwell, and sat back, exhausted. At precisely 6 o'clock, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Car is waiting outside. Damien. Madison's stomach twisted. This was real. This was actually happening. She gathered her things, her movements slow and dreamlike, and took the elevator down to the lobby. Outside, a sleek black town car idled at the curb, a driver in a dark suit standing beside the open door. Miss Taylor? Madison Blackwood. She corrected automatically, then immediately hated herself for it. The driver nodded, unbothered. Mr. Blackwood is waiting. The drive took 20 minutes, winding through the city and up into the hills where the houses grew larger and farther apart. When they finally stopped, Madison stepped out and stared. Damien's residence wasn't a house. It was an estate. Modern architecture blended with classic elegance, all glass walls and clean lines, surrounded by manicured gardens and a long driveway that curved like a question mark. The front door opened before she reached it. Damien stood in the entryway, still wearing his suit though he'd loosened his tie. For a moment, they just looked at each other. "Welcome home," he said, his tone unreadable. "This isn't my home," Madison shot back. "It is now." He stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter. Madison walked past him, her heels clicking against marble floors. The interior was as impressive as the exterior, all high ceilings, minimalist furniture, and art that probably belonged in a museum. It was beautiful. It was cold. It felt nothing like a home. "I'll show you to your room," Damien said, already heading toward a sweeping staircase. Madison followed, too drained to argue. He led her down a long hallway on the second floor, stopping at a door near the end. "This is yours." He pushed it open, revealing a spacious bedroom with a king-sized bed, a walk-in closet, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gardens. "Your things will be brought over tomorrow. If you need anything, there's a phone by the bed. Dial 0 for the house staff." Madison stepped inside, taking it all in. "And where's your room?" Damien's expression didn't change. "Down the hall. This is a business arrangement, Miss Taylor. I have no interest in complicating it." The formality in his voice stung more than it should have. She turned to face him. "So what now? Do I just live here like some kind of decorative accessory?" "You live here as my wife," he corrected. "In public, we'll present as a married couple. In private, you're free to do as you please, as long as it doesn't interfere with the arrangement." "And what exactly is this arrangement for?" Madison demanded. "Why did you need a wife so badly you'd trick someone into marrying you?" For the first time, Damien hesitated. It was brief, barely a flicker, but Madison caught it. "My grandfather," he said finally. "He's the majority shareholder in Blackwood Enterprises. He's also dying. And he's made it clear that he won't hand over control of the company unless I'm married. He believes a man without a family can't be trusted to run one." Madison stared at him. "So you're using me to inherit a company?" Damien's jaw tightened. "I'm using a legal solution to a business problem. You needed employment and financial stability. I've provided both. Don't pretend this is one-sided." Her anger flared, hot and bright. "I needed a job, not a fake marriage." "There's nothing fake about it," Damien said, his voice hardening. "We're legally bound. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be." He turned and walked out, closing the door behind him. Madison stood alone in the enormous bedroom, her reflection staring back at her from the darkened windows. She looked small, lost, like a stranger in someone else's life. Sinking onto the edge of the bed, she buried her face in her hands. "What am I doing?" But deep down, she knew. She was surviving. Just like she always had, even if it meant living in a gilded cage with a man who saw her as nothing more than a piece on his chessboard. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed softly. Madison lay back on the bed, staring up at the ceiling. Tomorrow, she'd figure out a plan. Tomorrow, she'd find a way out of this. But tonight, all she could do was close her eyes and hope that when she woke up, this would all turn out to be some twisted nightmare. It wasn't. Madison woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows in a moment of blissful confusion, before reality crashed back down. She was in Damien Blackwood's house. She was Damien Blackwood's wife. She groaned, pulling a pillow over her face. A soft knock at the door made her sit up. "Come in," she called, her voice rough with sleep. A woman in her 50s entered, carrying a tray with coffee, fresh fruit, and pastries. Her expression was warm, her smile genuine. "Good morning, Mrs. Blackwood. I'm Helen, the head of house staff. Mr. Blackwood asked me to make sure you were comfortable." Madison blinked at the title, still not used to it. "Thank you, Helen. And please, call me Madison." Helen set the tray on the bedside table. "As you wish." "Mr. Blackwood left for the office an hour ago, but he asked me to give you this." She handed Madison a note, written in sharp, precise handwriting. "Your belongings will arrive by noon. Feel free to explore the house. We'll discuss the terms of our arrangement tonight. Damien." Madison crumpled the note, irritation spiking. How thoughtful. Helen's eyes twinkled with what might have been amusement. "He's not as cold as he seems, dear. Give him time. I've worked for the Blackwood family for 20 years. That man has more heart than he lets on." Madison seriously doubted that, but she kept her thoughts to herself. After Helen left, she showered and dressed in the same clothes from yesterday, then spent the morning exploring the house. It was massive, room after room filled with expensive furniture and carefully curated art. There was a library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a home gym that looked like it belonged in a luxury hotel, and a kitchen so pristine it seemed criminal to actually cook in it. But despite all the luxury, the house felt empty. There were no family photos, no personal touches, nothing that suggested anyone actually lived here. It was a showcase, not a home. By noon, a moving truck arrived with her things, all 2 boxes and a suitcase worth. The movers placed them in her room, and Madison spent the afternoon unpacking, trying to make the sterile space feel even slightly like hers. It didn't work. At 7 that evening, Damien returned. Madison was in the library, curled up in an armchair with a book she wasn't really reading, when he appeared in the doorway. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. Madison closed the book. "I'm listening." He stepped into the room, hands in his pockets. "Tomorrow night, there's a charity gala. It's the first public event where we'll appear together as a couple. I expect you to play the part convincingly." Madison's eyebrows rose. "And what exactly does that entail?" "Smiling, polite conversation, appearing comfortable in my presence." Damien's tone was matter-of-fact, as if he were outlining a business proposal. "My grandfather will be there. He'll be watching. So I'm supposed to pretend I'm madly in love with you?" Damien's lips twitched, almost a smile. "I don't require adoration, just plausibility." Madison stood crossing her arms. "And what do I get out of this, besides the privilege of lying to a dying old man?" Damien's expression hardened. "You get $75,000 a year, a roof over your head, and freedom from financial worry. Most people would consider that a fair trade." "Most people weren't tricked into a fake marriage," Madison shot back. His jaw tightened. "I didn't trick you. You signed the contract. That's on you." The words hit like a slap. Madison's hands curled into fists. "You know what? Fine, I'll go to your gala. I'll smile and play the devoted wife. But don't expect me to like it. And don't expect me to forget that you manipulated me into this." Something flickered in Damien's eyes, too quick to identify. "Noted." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "There's a stylist coming tomorrow morning to help you prepare. Be ready at 8. Madison didn't respond, just watched him disappear down the hallway. That night she lay awake again, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow she'd step into Damien's world for real. She'd meet his grandfather, face the scrutiny of high society, and pretend her life hadn't been turned upside down. And somehow, she'd have to do it all without falling apart. The next morning the stylist arrived promptly at 8. A whirlwind of energy named Vanessa, who swept into Madison's room with garment bags and makeup cases. "Darling, we have so much work to do," Vanessa announced, eyeing Madison critically. "But don't worry, I've transformed politicians' daughters and celebrities' mistresses. You'll be stunning." Madison wasn't sure whether to be insulted or reassured. For the next 4 hours, she was poked, prodded, primped, and polished. Vanessa chose a gown in deep emerald green, elegant and understated, with a fitted bodice and a flowing skirt that made Madison feel like she'd stepped into a fairy tale. Her hair was styled in soft waves, her makeup subtle but flawless. When Vanessa finally stepped back, Madison barely recognized herself in the mirror. "Perfect," Vanessa declared. "You look like you belong in his world." "But I don't," Madison thought. At 6 that evening, Damien knocked on her door. She opened it, and for the first time since they'd met, his composure cracked. His eyes widened, just a fraction, and his gaze traveled over her slowly. "You look," he paused, "suitable." Madison fought the urge to roll her eyes. High praise. Something that might have been a smile ghosted across his lips. "Shall we?" The gala was held at a historic hotel downtown, its ballroom glittering with chandeliers and filled with people who looked like they'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. Madison's hand rested lightly on Damien's arm as they entered, and she felt every eye in the room turn toward them. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Damien Blackwood brought a date. "Who is she? I heard he got married. Is that her?" Damien leaned down, his breath warm against her ear. "Smile. You're doing fine." Madison pasted on her brightest smile, even as her heart hammered. They moved through the crowd, Damien introducing her to a blur of faces and names she'd never remember. Everyone was polite, but she could feel the judgment, the curiosity, the speculation. And then, an elderly man approached. He was tall despite his age, with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. "Grandfather," Damien said, his tone noticeably warmer. "This is Madison, my wife." The old man studied her for a long moment, and Madison felt like she was being x-rayed. Finally he smiled. "So you're the woman who finally tamed my grandson." Madison forced herself to meet his gaze. "I'm not sure anyone could tame him, sir. But I'm certainly trying." The old man laughed, a rich, genuine sound. "I like her, Damien. Don't mess this up." Damien's hand tightened slightly on Madison's waist. "I don't intend to." As the evening wore on, Madison found herself relaxing, just a little. Damien was attentive, his hand never leaving her back, his attention focused on her even when speaking to others. It was an act, she reminded herself, but it was a convincing one, and somewhere deep down, a dangerous thought whispered. What if it wasn't? The days following the gala blurred into a strange new routine. Madison woke each morning in the sprawling estate, breakfasted alone while Damien had already left for the office, and spent her days translating documents he sent her way. The work was challenging, engaging even, and it gave her something to focus on besides the surreal reality of her situation. But the evenings were different. Every night, Damien returned home, and they shared dinner together. At first, the meals were silent, awkward, filled with the weight of everything unsaid, but gradually cracks began to form in the walls between them. One night, about 2 weeks after the gala, Damien came home later than usual. Madison was in the library again, her refuge, when he appeared in the doorway, his tie loosened and exhaustion etched into his features. "Rough day?" she asked, looking up from her laptop. He sank into the armchair across from her. "You could say that. A merger fell through. Cost the company $20 million. Madison winced. "That sounds painful." "It's business," Damien said, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. "It happens." She closed her laptop, studying him. "You know, you're allowed to be frustrated. You don't have to pretend everything's fine all the time." His eyes met hers, something unguarded flickering there. "And what would you know about what I have to do?" "More than you think," Madison replied. "I spent 3 years pretending I wasn't drowning in debt and failure. I know what it's like to wear a mask." Damien was quiet for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, he asked, "Why did you become a translator?" Madison blinked at the shift. "I like languages. They're puzzles, you know. Every language has its own logic, its own rhythm, and when you can bridge the gap between two people who don't speak the same tongue, that's power." Real power. Not the kind that comes from money or status. Damien's expression softened, just slightly. That's surprisingly philosophical. She shrugged. I have my moments. And you? Why did you become a ruthless CEO who tricks women into marriage? His lips curved, an actual smile this time. Efficiency. Madison laughed despite herself, the sound surprising them both. For the first time since this whole mess began, the air between them didn't feel quite so heavy. Over the following weeks, their conversations grew longer, deeper. Damien told her about growing up under his grandfather's impossible expectations, about the pressure to prove himself worthy of the Blackwood name. Madison shared stories of her childhood, of immigrant parents who'd sacrificed everything so she could have opportunities they never did. Slowly, carefully, they began to see each other as more than adversaries. But Madison didn't forget why she was there. This was still a business arrangement. Damien had made that clear. And yet, the way he looked at her sometimes, like she was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve, made her heart do dangerous things. One Friday evening, Damien surprised her by coming home early. Pack a bag, he said without preamble. We're leaving for the weekend. Madison looked up from her translation work. Excuse me? My grandfather wants to see us at the family estate. It's about 2 hours north. We leave in an hour. Madison's stomach tightened. Meeting the grandfather again, this time on his turf, felt like stepping into a lion's den. But she nodded. The drive was quiet, the landscape shifting from city to countryside as they headed into the hills. Damien's family estate was even more impressive than his residence. A sprawling manor house surrounded by forests and gardens that looked like they belonged in a period drama. An older woman greeted them at the door, her smile warm. Master Damien, it's good to see you. And you must be Madison. I'm Margaret, the estate manager. Damien's grandfather appeared moments later, moving slowly, but with undeniable presence. Welcome both of you. Dinner is in an hour. Damien, I'd like a word in my study. Damien glanced at Madison, something apologetic in his eyes, then followed his grandfather down the hall. Margaret showed Madison to a guest room. If you need anything, dear, just ring. Left alone, Madison sank onto the bed, her mind racing. What was the old man saying to Damien? Was he suspicious? Had he seen through their act? At dinner, the tension was palpable. Damien's grandfather sat at the head of the table, his sharp eyes moving between them as they ate. So, Madison, he said suddenly, tell me, how did you and my grandson meet? Madison's heart skipped, but she kept her voice steady. Through work, actually. I was hired as a translator for Blackwood Enterprises. And you fell in love? It was Damien who answered, his hand covering hers on the table. Sometimes the best things happen when you least expect them. The old man's gaze lingered on their joined hands. I hope you're right, Damien. I truly do. That night, Madison couldn't sleep. She wandered the manor's halls, eventually finding herself in a portrait gallery lined with paintings of stern-faced Blackwood ancestors. You can't sleep either? Damien's voice made her jump. He stood at the other end of the gallery, hands in his pockets. Your grandfather is terrifying, Madison admitted. He smiled faintly. He has that effect on people. They stood in silence for a moment, surrounded by the weight of family history. Why does he care so much whether you're married? Madison asked quietly. Damien's jaw tightened. Because his own marriage was miserable. My grandmother died when I was young, but before that, they barely spoke. He thinks a family makes a man whole, makes him human. And you don't believe that? Madison pressed. Damien turned to look at her, his eyes unreadable. I didn't. But lately, I'm not so sure. The air between them shifted, charged with something neither of them wanted to name. Madison's breath caught as Damien stepped closer. This is dangerous, she thought. But she didn't move away. Damien's hand lifted, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face. The touch was feather-light, but it sent electricity racing down her spine. "We should get some sleep," he said, his voice rough. "Big day tomorrow." He turned and walked away, leaving Madison standing alone among the painted eyes of his ancestors, her heart pounding and her thoughts in chaos. Back in her room, she pressed a hand to her chest, trying to slow her racing pulse. This was supposed to be simple. A transaction. But nothing about Damien Blackwood was simple. And the worst part? She was starting to care. The next morning dawned bright and clear, sunlight spilling through the tall windows of the family estate. Madison woke to a soft knock, followed by Margaret entering with a breakfast tray. "Good morning, dear. Mr. Blackwood asked me to let you know that his grandfather would like to take a walk with you both in the gardens after breakfast." Madison's stomach flipped. A walk, just the three of them. That sounded like an interrogation waiting to happen. She dressed carefully in a simple sundress and cardigan, trying to look like someone who belonged in this world of old money and family legacies. When she came downstairs, Damien was waiting in the foyer, looking unfairly handsome in a casual button-down and dark jeans. "Ready?" he asked. "As I'll ever be." The gardens were breathtaking, a carefully tended maze of rose bushes, stone pathways, and fountains that whispered in the morning breeze. Damien's grandfather walked between them, his cane tapping against the stones. "I built these gardens for my wife," he said, his voice softer than Madison had heard it. She loved roses. Said they reminded her of her mother's garden back in England. Madison glanced at Damien, whose expression was carefully neutral. "After she died," the old man continued, "I let them go wild. Didn't see the point in maintaining beauty when there was no one to share it with. It was Damien who convinced me to restore them. Said I was dishonoring her memory by letting her favorite place fall apart." Damien's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You were grieving, grandfather." The old man stopped walking, turning to face them both. "Grief is a luxury, boy. Responsibility is not. That's why I'm glad you've finally found someone to share your life with." His eyes fixed on Madison. "Tell me, my dear, what do you see in my grandson?" The question was a trap, and Madison knew it. She could feel Damien tense beside her, but instead of panic, something else rose in her. Honesty. "I see someone who carries more weight than anyone should have to," she said quietly. "Someone who's so afraid of failing the people who depend on him that he forgets he's allowed to be human. Someone who pretends he doesn't need anyone, but who probably needs connection more than most." The old man's eyebrows rose. "And do you love him?" Madison's breath caught. The truth hovered on her lips. This is fake. This is all pretend. But when she looked at Damien, saw the vulnerability barely hidden behind his mask, the words that came out surprised even her. "I'm learning to." The silence stretched, taut as a wire. Then the old man smiled, a real smile that softened his entire face. "Good. That's all I needed to hear." He patted Damien's shoulder. "Don't let this one go, boy. She's got more spine than most." He walked ahead, leaving Madison and Damien standing alone on the path. Damien stared at her, his expression unreadable. "You didn't have to say that." "I know," Madison replied. Her heart was hammering, but she kept her voice steady. But it wasn't entirely a lie. Something flickered in his eyes, too quick to catch. We should catch up to him. That afternoon they drove back to the city. The car was quiet, the earlier tension still humming between them. Damien broke the silence first. "Thank you for what you said to my grandfather. You played your part well." Madison's chest tightened. "Right, my part." But Damien was already looking out the window, the moment lost. The following week settled back into routine, but something had shifted. Damien started coming home earlier, joining Madison for dinner without the stiff formality that had marked their earlier interactions. They talked more, laughed more, He showed her the books in his library that had belonged to his mother, shared stories about business trips that had gone hilariously wrong. Madison found herself looking forward to the evenings, to the warmth in his rare smiles, to the way his eyes crinkled when she made him laugh. But she also noticed other things. The way he rubbed his temples when he thought she wasn't looking, the phone calls he took in another room with his voice tight and worried. One night, she found him in his study long past midnight, surrounded by financial reports. "You're going to burn out," she said from the doorway. He looked up, startled. "I didn't hear you come in. Because you're too busy trying to solve every problem by yourself." Madison crossed the room, perching on the edge of his desk. "What's wrong?" Damien hesitated, then sighed. "There's a hostile takeover attempt. A rival company is buying up shares, trying to force me out. If they succeed, everything my grandfather built, everything I've worked for, it's gone." Madison's heart clenched. "Can you stop them?" "Not alone," Damien admitted. "I need allies, shareholders who'll vote in my favor. But that requires trust, and I've spent years keeping everyone at arm's length." "Then let me help," Madison said impulsively. "I'm good at reading people, at building rapport. Use me." Damien's eyes searched hers. "This isn't your fight." "Maybe not," Madison said. "But she hesitated, then pushed forward. "You're not alone anymore. Whether this marriage is real or not, I'm here, and I'm not going to stand by and watch you lose everything." For a long moment, Damien said nothing. Then, slowly, he reached out and took her hand. "Thank you." His thumb brushed across her knuckles, a touch so gentle it made her ache. Over the next few days, Madison threw herself into helping. She researched shareholders, identified key players, and helped Damien craft a strategy. They worked side by side, late into the nights, fueled by coffee and determination. And somewhere in the midst of spreadsheets and strategy sessions, the lines blurred even further. One night, exhausted and giddy from a breakthrough, Madison looked up to find Damien watching her. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. He shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. "Nothing. Just, you're remarkable." Her cheeks heated. "Careful, Blackwood. Compliments like that might make me think you actually like me." "Maybe I do," he said quietly. The air shifted, charged with electricity. Madison's pulse raced as Damien stood, crossing the small distance between them. He stopped inches away, close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes. "This wasn't part of the plan," he murmured. "What wasn't?" Madison whispered. "This," Damien said. And then he kissed her. It wasn't like the brief, awkward kiss they'd shared at the gala for appearances. This was real, deep, full of all the things they'd been dancing around for weeks. Madison's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and Damien's arms wrapped around her waist, holding her like she was something precious. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Damien rested his forehead against hers. "I can't stop thinking about you," he confessed. "You've completely derailed every plan I had." "Good," Madison said, her voice shaky. "Because you've done the same to me." They stood there, wrapped in each other. The world outside forgotten. For the first time since this whole charade began, Madison let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, this could be something real. The morning after their kiss, Madison woke with a strange mix of elation and terror. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every second of the night before. The way Damien's hands had cradled her face, the way he'd looked at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. It had felt real. But was it? Or was she just another piece in his carefully constructed game? She forced herself out of bed, showered and dressed, determined to act normal. Whatever normal meant anymore. When she came downstairs, Damien was in the kitchen. A rare sight. He stood at the counter with a cup of coffee, still in his dress shirt from the night before, sleeves rolled up. He looked up when she entered, and for a moment, Neither of them spoke. "About last night," he started. Madison's heart sank. Here it comes. The letdown. The "it" was a mistake speech, but Damien surprised her. "I meant what I said. I can't stop thinking about you. And I don't want to." Relief flooded through her. "I don't want you to stop." He crossed the kitchen in 3 strides, pulling her into his arms. They stood there, holding each other, and Madison felt something inside her unclench. Maybe this was crazy. Maybe it was reckless. But it was real. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. By day they worked together to counter the takeover attempt, meeting with shareholders and strategizing. By night, they grew closer in ways that had nothing to do with business. Damien took her to quiet restaurants where they talked for hours. They walked through the city at night, hand in hand, and Madison found herself laughing more than she had in years. He told her about his mother, who died when he was 15, about how he'd thrown himself into work to avoid the grief. She told him about her parents' struggles, about the pressure she'd felt to succeed for them. They shared their fears, their dreams, the parts of themselves they'd kept hidden, and slowly, carefully, they fell in love. But the takeover threat still loomed. One afternoon, Damien came home early, his expression grim. "What happened?" Madison asked, setting down her laptop. "The board is meeting tomorrow," Damien said. "Final vote on the takeover. If we don't have enough support, it's over." "Do we have enough?" "I don't know," he admitted. "It's going to be close." That night, Madison couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about everything Damien stood to lose, about the company his grandfather had built, about the man who'd finally let himself be vulnerable. She refused to let it all fall apart. The next morning, she did something impulsive. While Damien was at the office preparing for the board meeting, Madison called his grandfather. "Mr. Blackwood, it's Madison. I need your help." That afternoon, Madison walked into Blackwood Enterprises for the first time since the day she'd accidentally signed her life away. The board meeting was underway on the top floor, and she could feel the tension radiating through the building. She took the elevator up, her heart pounding. When the doors opened, she found herself face to face with Gregory Caldwell. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said, surprised. "The meeting is closed to non-board members." "I'm not here as a spectator," Madison said firmly. "I'm here as Damien's wife. And I have something the board needs to hear." Caldwell hesitated, then nodded. "Follow me." The boardroom was a long, imposing space filled with men and women in expensive suits. Damien sat at the head of the table, his expression composed but his eyes betraying his stress. He looked up when Madison entered, shock flashing across his face. "Madison? What are you doing here?" She walked to the front of the room, her hands shaking but her voice steady. "I'm here to remind this board what Damien Blackwood has done for this company." She pulled out a tablet, displaying a presentation she'd spent all night preparing. Under his leadership, Blackwood Enterprises has seen a 200% increase in revenue. He's expanded into new markets, created thousands of jobs, and maintained ethical standards that most companies abandon in pursuit of profit. One of the board members, a woman in her 60s, spoke up. "We're aware of his accomplishments, Mrs. Blackwood. But the offer on the table is substantial." "Then let me ask you this," Madison said. "Do you want a company that's profitable, or a company that's soulless? Because that's what you'll get if you sell to people who see this as nothing more than a ledger sheet." Damien built this company on his grandfather's vision. A vision of innovation, integrity, and legacy. If you take that away, what's left? The room was silent. Madison's heart hammered, but she pushed on. "I know I'm new to this world. I know most of you don't know me, don't trust me. But I know Damien. And I believe in him. If you give him a chance, he'll prove that loyalty is worth more than any buyout offer." She looked directly at Damien, whose eyes were locked on hers. "He's worth believing in." The silence stretched, unbearable. Then Damien's grandfather, who'd been sitting quietly in the corner, stood. "My granddaughter-in-law is right," he said, his voice carrying the weight of decades. "I vote to reject the takeover." One by one, other hands rose. The tide turned. When the final count came in, Damien had won. The room erupted in conversation, but Madison only saw Damien, who crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. "You didn't have to do that," he said, his voice rough. "Yes, I did," Madison replied. "Because I love you." Damien pulled back just enough to look at her, his eyes bright. "Say that again." "I love you," Madison repeated, smiling through the tears that had started to fall. "Damien Blackwood, I love you." He kissed her, right there in front of the entire board, and Madison didn't care who was watching. When they finally broke apart, Damien's grandfather approached, a rare smile on his face. "Well done, both of you." He looked at Damien. "You've found something more valuable than any company, boy. Don't lose it." "I won't," Damien promised, his hand tightening around Madison's. That evening, back at the estate, Damien and Madison stood on the terrace overlooking the gardens. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. "I never thought I'd say this," Damien murmured, "but I'm glad you signed that contract." Madison laughed. "Best worst decision I ever made." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "I want to do this right, Madison. I want a real marriage, not a business arrangement. I want you, all of you, for the rest of my life." Her heart swelled. "I want that too." "Then let's start over," Damien said. He took her hand, getting down on one knee. "Madison Taylor, will you marry me? For real this time?" Madison laughed through her tears, nodding. "Yes. 1,000 times yes." He slipped a ring onto her finger, this one chosen with care, and stood to kiss her again. And for the first time since this whole crazy journey began, Madison felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. 3 months later, Madison stood in front of a full-length mirror, staring at her reflection. The wedding dress was simple but elegant, ivory silk that flowed like water, with delicate lace sleeves and a train that whispered against the floor. Chloe stood beside her, eyes brimming with tears. "I still can't believe this is happening," Chloe said, adjusting Madison's veil. "You went from unemployed and desperate to marrying a billionaire. It's like a..." Madison smiled. "Trust me, the journey was messier than any movie." "But worth it?" Chloe pressed. Madison thought about the past months, about the arguments they'd had when Damien reverted to his controlling tendencies, about the nights they'd stayed up talking through their fears, about the slow, beautiful process of building something real. "Worth every second," she confirmed. The ceremony was held in the gardens of the family estate, the same gardens where Damien's grandfather had first tested her. Rows of white chairs were filled with family, friends, and colleagues. But Madison only saw Damien, waiting for her at the altar in a perfectly tailored suit, his eyes locked on hers. As she walked down the aisle, her father's arm linked through hers, she felt like she was floating. This was real. This was her choice. When she reached Damien, he took her hands, his touch warm and steady. "You're beautiful," he whispered. "You're not so bad yourself," she whispered back, making him smile. The officiant began the ceremony, but Madison barely heard the words. She was too focused on Damien, on the way he was looking at her like she was his entire world. When it came time for vows, Damien went first. "Madison, when you walked into my life, I thought I had everything figured out. I thought success was measured in profit margins and corporate victories. But you showed me that the greatest success is finding someone who sees you, all of you, and loves you anyway. You challenged me, frustrated me, and made me a better man. I promise to spend the rest of my life earning the love you've given me." Madison's throat tightened with emotion. "Damien, I came into this marriage by accident, thinking it was the worst thing that had ever happened to me. But it turned out to be the best. You taught me that strength isn't about doing everything alone. It's about letting someone stand beside you." I promise to be your partner, your equal, your home. I love you. Today and every day after. There wasn't a dry eye in the garden when they exchanged rings and sealed their vows with a kiss. The reception was a blur of champagne, laughter, and dancing. Madison found herself pulled from conversation to conversation, meeting relatives and friends, all of whom seemed genuinely happy for them. At one point, Damien's grandfather pulled her aside. "You've done well, my dear," he said, "not just in saving the company, but in saving my grandson. He was lost before you." "I didn't save him," Madison said gently. "We saved each other." The old man smiled. "That's the secret, isn't it? A good marriage isn't about one person rescuing the other. It's about two people choosing each other. Every single day." As the evening wore on, Damien found Madison on the terrace, sneaking a moment of quiet. "There you are," he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "I was starting to think my wife had run away." "Your wife is just taking a breather," Madison said, leaning back against him. "It's been a long day." "The best day," Damien corrected. She turned in his arms, smiling up at him. "You know, when I signed that contract all those months ago, I thought my life was over. And now? Now I know it was just beginning." They stood there, holding each other under the stars, the sound of music and laughter drifting from the reception. Damien brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I love you, Madison Blackwood." "I love you too," she replied. "And I always will." Months turned into years, and their love only deepened. Madison continued her translation work, eventually starting her own consultancy that partnered with Blackwood Enterprises on international projects. Damien learned to delegate, to trust, to let people in. They traveled the world together, built a home filled with warmth and laughter, and supported each other through every challenge. There were hard days, of course, days when Damien's old control issues resurfaced, when Madison's independence clashed with his need to protect. But they talked through it, fought fair, and never let the sun set on their anger. And through it all, they chose each other. 5 years after their first wedding, they renewed their vows in a small, private ceremony with just close family. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was simply about celebrating the life they'd built. As Madison stood beside Damien, watching the sunset over the gardens they'd come to love, she thought about that scared, desperate girl who'd walked into Blackwood Enterprises looking for a job. That girl had no idea that signing the wrong contract would lead to signing her heart over to the right man. Life had a funny way of working out. "So, what do you think?" Damien asked, pulling her close. "Was it worth it? Accidentally marrying a billionaire who said it was too late to back out?" Madison laughed, her heart full. "Best accident of my life." He kissed her, slow and sweet. And Madison knew that whatever came next, they'd face it together. Because this wasn't a business arrangement anymore. This was love. Real, messy, beautiful love. And she wouldn't trade it for anything. 7 years into their marriage, Madison woke to the sound of rain pattering against the windows and the warm weight of Damien's arm draped across her waist. She smiled, turning to find him still asleep, his usually sharp features softened in rest. It was a Saturday, one of the rare weekends when neither of them had obligations. Just time. She slipped out of bed carefully, padding downstairs to the kitchen. Over the years, the estate had transformed from a cold showcase into a real home. There were photos on the walls now, candid shots of trips they'd taken, family gatherings, moments of joy captured and displayed. The sterile perfection had given way to comfortable chaos. As she started the coffee maker, her phone buzzed. A message from Chloe. "Brunch tomorrow? I have news." Madison smiled, typing back. "Can't wait. Tell me you're not pregnant again." The reply came instantly. "Fine, I won't tell you." Madison laughed. Chloe and her husband were expecting their third child, and Madison couldn't be happier for her friend. Behind her, footsteps sounded. She turned to find Damien leaning against the doorway, his hair disheveled, wearing nothing but pajama pants. "You left me," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "I was making coffee," she replied, crossing to him. "Forgive me?" He pulled her into his arms, kissing the top of her head. "Only if you come back to bed after." Deal. They sat on the terrace despite the rain, protected by the overhang, sipping coffee and watching the gardens glisten. "This is nice," Madison murmured. "Just us." Damien's hand found hers. "I've been thinking." "About?" He hesitated, then met her eyes. "About kids." Madison's heart skipped. They'd talked about it before in abstract terms, but never seriously. "And what are you thinking?" she asked carefully. "I think," Damien said slowly, "that I want to build a family with you. Not because my grandfather expects it, not for appearances, but because I want to see what kind of person we'd create together. I want a little girl with your stubbornness and my, what do you call it, control issues?" Madison laughed, her eyes stinging. "That sounds terrifying, but also wonderful. So, is that a yes?" Damien's voice was tentative, hopeful. Madison leaned in, kissing him softly. "That's a yes." 18 months later, Madison stood in the nursery they'd spent weeks decorating, holding their daughter. Lily Grace Blackwood had arrived 3 weeks early, tiny and perfect, with a shock of dark hair and her father's gray eyes. Damien sat in the rocking chair, his expression one of wonder as he watched them. "She's so small," he said, his voice awed. "She's perfect," Madison corrected. "Do you want to hold her?" Damien's hands trembled slightly as he took his daughter, cradling her with a gentleness that made Madison's heart ache. "Hi, Lily," he whispered. "I'm your dad. I have no idea what I'm doing, but I promise I'll figure it out." Madison sank into the chair beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. "We'll figure it out together." The first year of parenthood was chaos. Sleepless nights, endless diaper changes, the constant worry that they were doing everything wrong. But it was also filled with moments of breathtaking joy. Lily's first smile, her first laugh, the way she reached for Damien when he came home from work. Damien proved to be a devoted father. He rearranged his schedule to be home for bath time, read bedtime stories with theatrical voices that made Madison laugh, and walked the floors with Lily when she wouldn't sleep. One night, Madison found him in the nursery at 2 a.m, Lily asleep on his chest. Both of them in the rocking chair. "You should put her down," Madison whispered. In a minute, Damien replied, his hand gentle on Lily's back. "I just want to hold her a little longer." Madison's heart swelled. "I love you," she said. He looked up, his eyes soft. "I love you too, both of you. More than I ever thought possible." As Lily grew, she became a perfect blend of both of them. Stubborn like Madison, determined like Damien, with a laugh that filled the house. On her 3rd birthday, they threw a party in the gardens. Family and friends filled the space, and Lily ran around in a princess dress, her joy infectious. Damien's grandfather, now in his 90s but still sharp, sat in a chair of honor, watching the festivities with a contented smile. "You did well," he told Damien. "Both of you. This is what matters. Not boardrooms or profit margins. This." Damien looked at Madison, who was chasing Lily through the roses, their daughter's laughter ringing out. "I know," he said. "I finally understand." That night, after the guests had left and Lily was tucked into bed, Madison and Damien stood in the gardens, the same spot where they'd renewed their vows. "You know," Madison said, "I've been thinking about that day I signed the contract. The day that changed everything." Damien wrapped his arms around her. "Regret it? Not for a second," she said. "But I do wonder sometimes what would have happened if I'd read it more carefully. We probably wouldn't be here, Damien admitted. I'd still be alone in this house, and you'd still be struggling to make ends meet. Fate works in mysterious ways, Madison mused. Or maybe it was just really good luck. Damien kissed her temple. Whatever it was, I'm grateful. For every moment. For you. For us. Madison turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd started as a stranger, become an adversary, then a friend, and finally, the love of her life. Me too, she whispered. Me too. Years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and joys. Lily started school, showing an aptitude for languages that made Madison beam with pride. Damien expanded the company into green energy, a passion project that combined profit with purpose. Madison's consultancy thrived, earning her recognition as one of the top translators in the field. But through it all, the core of their life remained the same. Each other. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Damien surprised Madison with a trip to Paris, just the two of them. Lily stayed with her grandparents, who spoiled her outrageously, and Madison and Damien rediscovered the romance that had started in the midst of chaos. They walked along the Seine, ate at tiny cafes, and danced in their hotel room to music only they could hear. On their last night, as they stood on the balcony overlooking the city of lights, Damien pulled out a small box. Madison's breath caught. Another ring? He smiled. Open it. Inside was a delicate bracelet, engraved with a single line. Best accident of my life. Madison's eyes filled with tears. Damien, it's perfect. Just like you, he said. Just like us. She fastened it around her wrist, then pulled him into a kiss. I would do it all over again, she said. Every confusing, terrifying, wonderful moment. So would I, Damien replied. 1,000 times over. They returned home to find Lily waiting for them. Full of stories about her adventures with her grandparents, Madison scooped her up, breathing in the sweet scent of her daughter's hair, and felt complete. That night, after Lily was asleep, Madison and Damien sat in the library, the room that had been her refuge when she'd first arrived. So much has changed, she said, looking around. Damien followed her gaze. For the better. Definitely for the better, Madison agreed. She thought about the scared, desperate girl who'd signed a contract without reading it, who'd thought her life was over. That girl had no idea she was signing up for the greatest adventure of her life. Sometimes the best things come from the biggest mistakes, Madison said. Or maybe they're not mistakes at all, Damien replied. Maybe they're just the universe's way of getting us where we're supposed to be. Madison smiled, leaning into his embrace. Then I guess the universe knew what it was doing. It always does, Damien said, kissing the top of her head. It always does. 15 years after Madison accidentally signed a marriage license instead of an employment contract, she found herself standing in the same ballroom where she and Damien had attended their first gala together. But this time, everything was different. The event was a charity fundraiser for literacy programs, and cause close to Madison's heart. She'd co-founded the organization 5 years earlier, and tonight they were celebrating a milestone, reaching 1 million children across the globe with free language education resources. Madison stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd of donors and supporters. Her eyes found Damien, sitting at a front table with Lily, now 12 years old and already showing signs of the brilliant, compassionate woman she'd become. When I was 25, Madison began, her voice steady. I was desperate, unemployed, drowning in debt, and willing to sign anything that promised a paycheck. She paused, letting a wry smile curve her lips. And I do mean anything. The audience chuckled. What I didn't know then, she continued, was that sometimes our greatest blessings come disguised as disasters. Sometimes the thing that terrifies us most is exactly what we need. She looked directly at Damien. I signed a contract that day without reading it carefully. It changed my life in ways I never could have imagined. It brought me love, family, purpose. But more than that, it taught me that we're all capable of more than we think. That desperation can lead to transformation. That endings can be beginnings. The crowd applauded as she finished her speech, and Madison stepped down to find Damien waiting. "Proud of you," he murmured, pulling her close. "Always." Lily bounced over, her energy boundless. "Mom, that was amazing. Can I help at the next program event? Please?" Madison laughed, ruffling her daughter's hair. "We'll see. You've got school to focus on." "I can do both," Lily insisted. "Just like you." Damien caught Madison's eye over their daughter's head, his expression warm. "She's definitely your daughter." "And yours," Madison replied. Stubborn to the core. That night, after Lily had gone to bed, Madison and Damien walked through their gardens. The roses were in full bloom, their scent heavy in the summer air. Over the years, they'd added to the gardens, creating new sections that reflected their journey. There was a Japanese garden where they'd scattered cherry blossom petals on their 5th anniversary, a wildflower meadow where Lily loved to play, and a quiet reflecting pool where they often sat in comfortable silence. "Do you ever think about what your life would be like if I hadn't walked into that conference room?" Madison asked. Damien was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes," he admitted. "I think I'd be successful, powerful, and completely empty." He turned to face her, taking both her hands. "You filled spaces in me I didn't even know existed, Madison. You made me human again." Madison felt the familiar sting of happy tears. "You did the same for me. You gave me confidence, purpose, a family. You gave me a reason to believe in impossible things." They'd had this conversation before, in different forms, over the years, but it never got old. Acknowledging what they meant to each other, what they'd built together, felt like renewing their vows all over again. Lily's voice drifted from her bedroom window, calling out, "Dad, can you check for monsters under my bed?" Damien laughed. "She's 12 and still asking for monster checks. Some things never change." "Go," Madison said, kissing him softly. "I'll be up in a minute." She watched him walk back to the house, his stride confident but relaxed in a way it never had been when they first met. The Ice King had melted, replaced by a man who knew how to love, how to be vulnerable, how to be present. Madison thought about the moment in the conference room all those years ago, when Gregory Caldwell had pointed to signature lines and she'd signed without fully understanding. It should have been a disaster. In many ways, it had been. But it had also been the beginning of everything. Her phone buzzed with a message from Chloe. "Saw your speech online. Crying in my kitchen. You're amazing. Also, remember when you called me freaking out about accidentally marrying a billionaire? Best panic call ever." Madison laughed, typing back, "Best worst day of my life." Chloe's response was immediate. "Pretty sure it was just the best day. You were too stubborn to admit it." "Maybe," Madison conceded. Inside the house, she could hear Damien reading to Lily, his voice animated as he brought the story to life. Lily's giggles punctuated the narrative. Bright and pure. This was her life now. Not perfect, there were still arguments, still moments of frustration and fear. But it was real. It was hers. It was theirs. Madison thought about all the women out there who might be where she'd been, desperate, scared, willing to sign anything for a chance. She wanted to tell them that sometimes the scariest leaps lead to the softest landings, that trusting yourself, even when you're terrified, can open doors you never imagined. But she also wanted to tell them to read contracts before signing, because while her story had a happy ending, she'd been incredibly, impossibly lucky. She climbed the stairs, finding Damien and Lily still in the middle of their story. Lily's eyes were drooping, but she fought sleep, unwilling to miss a moment. Madison sat on the edge of the bed, and Damien's hand found hers automatically, their fingers interlaced.